Welcome to Adventures in Solitaire. Today we will be discussing Four Against the Netherworld. So, as stated in the intro, today we'll be discussing Four Against the Netherworld. So, as always, what is Four Against the Netherworld? Well, Four Against the Netherworld is a supplement for the Four Against Darkness dungeon delving adventure game system. So before we go too much further, I do think it worth mentioning here that there is content that may disturb or offend some. It did in fact disturb me a little bit as I read through it the first time, but I think that it really did its job conveying what it was trying to do. It is setting up a place that most people would never want to go. And as I can be very visual, it definitely created some very striking visual imagery for me. This video will be covering the topics of cannibalism, the butchering, flaying, and trade of humans and other intelligent entities, slaves and ownership of slaves, trade of slaves for the purpose of cannibalism, and the concept of soul trade. Now, I doubt these concepts in the game will turn most away, but I did want to be sensitive to those to whom it may bother. I know if I cringed a bit, then there would be those who would certainly be affected to a greater degree. So, with that out of the way, I think it would be good to see what the author has to say about Four Against the Netherworld. Abandon all hope. Four Against the Netherworld is a supplement for Four Against the Darkness for characters levels 6 through 9. In its pages, you'll find new classes, the Demonologist, Cambion, Cleric of Zerg, Cleric of Foros, and a reworked Paladin, a complete economic system for the Netherworld, rules for hex-based exploration, with plenty of terrain types, and a downloadable color map of the known regions of the Netherworld. 6 new spells for wizards and Cambions, new reactions, burn, soul, capture, conversion, demonic pact, mercenaries, demand obeisance, sorry for the mispronounce if that's mispronounced there, and more. Tables to generate encounters and events. Plenty of new deadly monsters, including randomly generated Lovecraftian aberrations. This is not a standalone game. To use it, you will need a copy of Four Against Darkness and Four Against the Abyss. So if you have purchased other Four Against Darkness supplements, then you may be aware that the supplements generally come in 2 forms. Smaller books like these that have a few additional features or maybe a small one-off adventure, and other books like these that have many different additions to offer. Four Against the Netherworld is one of the larger game supplements for Four Against Darkness. To my recollection, it was the first supplement to offer a Hexcrawl experience. And as of my last check, and I may be mistaken here, it is the only one that offers an open world Hexcrawl experience. Unless you consider Fortress of the Warlord an open world experience, I would say that Four Against the Netherworld is actually more open by a large degree than even Fortress of the Warlord there. So this had me very excited, as I'd been wanting something that would allow me to roam the outside world, outside of the dungeons. And in my recent review of D100 Dungeon World Builder, I commented on the need to have things happening outside of the dungeons, and Four Against the Netherworld definitely does allow for this in a very specific and thematic way. As explained by the author, it does include new classes, which also come with new expert skills, as you heard. It includes new rule systems for the following. That includes food, soul trading with soul cubes, and of course rules for the Hexcrawl experience as a whole. There's a lot of additions here, and we'll cover all of those additions later. So as you can see, there's a lot of content here. You may also have noticed that there are some very dark themes here, and the book will definitely dig into those themes. I was actually taken aback personally due to how dark it seemed to me at first. I think now would be a good time to talk about the individual sections of the book in finer detail. So let's talk about the world or the dimension of Four Against the Netherworld. And as we get ready to go there, I do think it's worth mentioning that Four Against the Netherworld does require that you have both the Four Against Darkness core book and of course the Four Against the Abyss game supplement. There are some elements that you could use without Four Against the Abyss, but I would not recommend getting Four Against the Netherworld unless you already have Four Against the Abyss. If you're not familiar with the Four Against the Abyss supplement, then I highly recommend you get that book, as it is probably the most important supplement that you can get for the game system. So many other systems are based upon this book. I have done a review on that supplement, and you can watch if you have not already been introduced to Four Against the Abyss, or you can of course find other reviews online as well. Given that this is using the Four Against the Abyss supplement, it will be using expert level characters, so you'll want to make sure that you have leveled your party appropriately before entering the Netherworld. Your adventures in Four Against the Netherworld may take several real-time days or even weeks if you are doing more than one Netherworld objective. This will of course depend on how much time you have to dedicate to your individual gameplay sessions. The Netherworld is a very thematic setting, and I really enjoyed the way the book itself describes its dark and unsettling setting. So I think it's best to start here. Listeners, beware. The afterlife is not the joyous paradise that the sermons of clerics would have you believe. Beyond reality as we know it lie other dimensions, alien landscapes inhabited by eerie, unfathomable entities. The demon worlds. These worlds are extremely dangerous, hostile to life at their very core, ripe with the threat of death at every step, but also fantastic rewards for the lucky or the brave. Among those forlorn demon worlds, there is one which the clergy dare not talk about, and keep secret at all costs, the Netherworld. In this grey, dismal realm of obsidian and dust, the souls of all the dead, good and evil alike, congregate as spectral forms to be shepherded by demons and siphoned into energy reservoirs through the abominable soul furnaces. The cold, polished soul cubes that result from this horrible processing of souls produce the most efficient source of magical dwemer known, able to power mighty artifacts and recharge depleted magical items. To retrieve these soul cubes, demonic artifacts, and other forbidden treasures found only in the Netherworld, powerful warlocks and the most callous of high priests organize expeditions of veteran adventurers into the Netherworld through sorcerous gates created by astronomical conjunctions and, it is believed, horrific rituals. Whereas all dungeon delvers are privy to risking death, these few and chosen courageous or brave souls put not only their lives, but their very souls at stake. So, if there was any part of you or your party that were looking forward to a new land to adventure in, I think that may have stopped you in your tracks. Maybe. This description is pretty spot on. It's not a nice place. It is a place of what we might classically call evil and or of primal despair. So, how does one get to the Netherworld? Entry into the Netherworld can be done the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is through an unlucky death. Unlucky meaning you ended up somewhere you did or did not expect to end up. If you happen to have a complete wipe of your party, you can start a new game with those same characters in the Netherworld. The party would lose all belongings and would then be assumed to have been able to find basic starting equipment that is available to all level 1 characters. On that note, your characters would retain their leveling and elite skills they had acquired before death. In addition, all members of the party would now be classified as undead for the purposes of theme and gameplay where applicable. If your party, or what's left of it, happened to make it out of the Netherworld, then they would be returned to their human form, though I will say, best of luck if you happen to find yourself in this situation. There is a reason that there are so many weakened and battered slaves being hauled around the lands of the Netherworld. The hard way of finding one's way into the Netherworld is to find a priest or warlock who is able to dabble in the dark arts. It takes some dark magic indeed to send someone into the vast hellscape that is the Netherworld. Though, in truth, if you and your party are ready for the Netherworld, then you can simply choose to start a fresh game in the setting and assume that they have found the needed parties to cast their unholy rituals. Thankfully, the book has a table for quest objectives and assumes just this very thing, if you do not have a reason of your own to venture there. As long as you have arrived in the Netherworld via some way outside of death, you will be dropped in one of 6 random locations on the pre-drawn hex map provided in the book. You will have opportunities to explore beyond the known or charted Netherworld and generate a map on the fly using a random table. So let's talk a bit about survival in the Netherworld. Four Against the Netherworld has survival mechanics like many Hexcrawl systems. The Netherworld is not kind even to those entities that call it home. So you can imagine how kind it would be to entities that are not of its own dimension. Humans are the most common form of trade here. Their souls and flesh are goods to be bartered as currency and food. Ancient civilizations would measure the volume of weight of food when talking about the cost of one good or another. One bag of grain or rice to be traded or bartered for one item or another. More expensive items costing more weight in the preferred foodstuff used as a measure of trade. The netherworld is not so dissimilar. In the netherworld, the primary means for barter is the flesh of humans and their souls. All souls are valuable in the netherworld, so although humans are the primary source of trade, any intelligent soul is up for grabs. Though the more pure, the better. You always will have to worry about demonic slavers of all types, as they're always on the lookout for the next payday, and your party would make for a handsome sum. Slavery will not typically be your first concern, and it won't be the most important concern. Your party's real problems will come in the way of nourishment in the hellish badlands of the netherworld. The netherworld was not made for anything but demons to live in. There are no bountiful forests here. Your party will have to enjoy their last meals that they brought along with them. Four Against the Netherworld assumes that your party brought enough rations for a party of 4 to last 10 days. So you will start with a total of 40 rations for a party of 4, split evenly 4 ways. Each day that passes will require that you consume 1 ration per party member. In addition, each character can carry a maximum of 10 food apiece. You can consume those rations or forage for more in the form of edible mold. The difficulty ratings depend on the area of the netherworld that your characters currently occupy. Caverns have a difficulty rating of 4, canyons 5, mountains 6, and rangers, barbarians, and druids get a -1 to their die roll when attempting the forage test. This is actually a good thing. You will make 1 roll for the character with the highest exploding die type. It is likely that this will be the D8, and from there you can choose as you will on a tie. If you succeed at the test, every character will receive a day's rations for every point that you exceed the difficulty rating by. So, if the target number was 4 and you rolled a 6, each character would then get a total of 3 rations apiece. The last and final option you may find yourself struggling with, or not struggling at all, are captives or slaves as a food source. During your party's time in the netherworld, they will likely find themselves rescuing or finding slaves and or captives. In acts of desperation, one would assume, you can consume a captive or slave to receive 10 food. This food is obviously food from an intelligent entity, human or not, and your characters will be immediately forced to make a madness check upon committing this act. Additionally, any captive or slave that you have with your party is treated as retainers with a life of 1, and each individual will require 1 food per day or die of starvation. Four Against the Netherworld will also allow you to consume a slave or captive to feed other slaves and captives. This would, of course, incur a madness penalty for your party. Well, with that out of the way, at some point you'll likely need or be driven to the desire to find some settlement for supplies outside of moldy food. Scattered around the known netherworld are vast cities and strongholds. These cities or strongholds have what might be considered to be loose rules of conduct or law. They will even allow non-demonic entities to access to the cities as long as their guests are willing to pay their daily fees. Failure to pay the daily fee of 1 necro per character will result in immediate consequences. So it might be best to talk about what a necro is here. Knowing what necros are may well be the difference, and it likely will, between life and death for your party. Meat, blood, and souls are all measured by the netherworld currency of the necros. The average human slave goes for 11 necros. And this is where the conversation gets a little awkward. The weighting for the necro value is figured as follows. The meat of the body goes for 10 necro, on average, and then an additional necro for each health point the entity has. This would be its blood. So a good netherworld demon would want to make sure that a high HP human warrior was kept in good condition, as they can go for more than double that of the average human slave. Souls are a particular note. Souls are a very valuable resource in the netherworld. Captives are taken to large soul furnaces to have their souls siphoned from their bodies before what is left can be drained of blood, flayed, and taken apart. If the process of soul siphoning is successful, then it will be drained into a soul cube. Once the soul has successfully been secured inside a soul cube, it is a worth of 50 necros. If you ever manage to find a soul cube outside of the netherworld, or find a way to bring one back, it will have a gold piece value of 50 GP. You will of course want to know where and what you can use your acquired necros on. And we will cover that in strongholds and cities and other notable Netherworld locations shortly. Because I do consider escaping or fleeing a method of survival, let's talk about how you can get yourself out of the Netherworld. Unless you have died and awoken in the Netherworld, a temporary gate was formed where you first arrived and when you first arrived. You can return to this gate and attempt to cross back into the world from whence you came. You will have to make a difficulty check that is determined by the highest madness level of your party. That character's madness level will become your difficulty check. If no one has any madness built up, then your check is an automatic success. You may also spend 3 clues in order to re-roll the die if you fail the attempt. If you fail the attempt, then the portal will close immediately and you will be forced to search the Netherworld hoping to find another. For every unexplored hex that you enter, you'll roll a d6 in addition to any other rolls or actions you may need to make to see if you have discovered an open portal. A roll of 6 will give you the result of having found a portal. Be warned, however, the denizens of the Netherworld do not leave these gates unprotected. Once discovered, you'll be rolling for the gate's guardians. So far, we have talked about surviving in the Netherworld, but nothing too specific about what it's like to travel across the Netherworld. In other words, the Hexcrawl experience. The Hexcrawl flow looks like the following. You will move from one hex or area to an adjacent hex. Before leaving the hex entirely, you'll need to make an orientation roll to make sure that your party has not become lost while moving through the terrain. It is important to note that before the move step of each day, you may choose to explore ahead. And this is for already mapped or unmapped terrain as well. For each day that you spend exploring before your move, you can increase the chances of success at the orientation roll. The difficulty of the roll will depend on the terrain that you're entering and is listed on the terrain challenges table. If you have a Demonologist in your party, you can add +1 to your roll in addition to the +1 per day that you gained in exploration. Should you fail your orientation roll, you must spend 1 whole day lost. You will not, as in other Hexcrawl systems, be rolling for a random hex for your party to wander into. The Netherworld is an extremely challenging and confusing realm. This is, after all, an alternate dimension, and it is not your home. It was not made for us, but rather for something, or things, else entirely. You will then immediately make an encounter check by rolling a d6 and compare it to the encounter rating on the terrain challenges table. If it is equal to or greater than the listed value for the terrain that you're entering, then you will experience an encounter. In the case of an encounter, you will then find one of the reasonable number of encounter tables matching the terrain and make a roll to see what happens. Each of these terrain encounter tables, of course, has its own unique encounters. This definitely can help each area of the underworld feel unique, and there are far too many possible results to cover, as you can see, so we won't be covering all of this. Just know that there are many things that can happen across a good span of tables to keep things fresh and interesting, and also to help remind you of which regions you would likely want to stay away from, though really any region in the Netherworld is an ever-present danger in one form or another. After your encounter, or lack thereof, you'll make your mold forging roll for sustenance, as we discussed earlier in the review. You can, if you so choose, make camp for the day so that you can recover a single life point for each character who spends time resting. Characters who can't eat may not rest to regain that life point. As you travel through the Netherworld, you will want to make note of any notable terrain features or hidden elements that you have uncovered on the hex map, as those will stay a permanent addition to the map. So you will be encountering those major features should you go back into a previously visited hex. You'll always make encounter checks regardless of whether you have visited hexes in the past. If you should be daring enough to want to venture beyond the loosely mapped and known area of the Netherworld, then you can do so. You will get a blank map sheet and roll on the Netherworld random terrain table to discover the terrain or features of the hex your party is about to enter into. The turn process will then be followed as normal. We now have the vast majority of everything we need to know about the Hexcrawl experience that Four Against the Netherworld has to offer, including its survival elements, so I think it's a good time to talk a bit more about the various sights and features of the world that you may uncover as you explore the Netherworld. The terrain of the Netherworld is as varied as it is in our own, if not as hospitable. While exploring and doing your best to survive, you'll discover windswept plateaus that are crisscrossed with violent windstorms that make all but the most sturdy of ranged weapons extremely difficult to use. The skies of the windswept plateaus are not friendly to anything that is capable of making its way through the air either, so flying abilities will have no effect here. There is the Sea of Dust, which is appropriately named, well, Dust Sea. While within the Dust Sea, the dunes and great swaths of sand and dust will prevent escape from any combat your characters encounter here. You will from time to time run into caverns and canyons that you can search, just as you would a corridor, to find mold and equal gold value to anything you might find in the normal Four Against Darkness corridor. If you happen to run into any of the vast mountain ranges by choice or chance, your party will have their work cut out attempting to cross. A single difficulty check of 8 is required to pass, and failure means a forced D6 roll for every member of the party, including slaves and captives, requiring a roll of anything but a 1 or a 2. A failed roll by the characters will result in 1 damage to their health. Failure by captives and slaves will result in their immediate death. Speaking of vast mountains, there are also vast chasms that are completely impassable by any means. To the far southwest of the known Netherworld is the Quagmire of Distress. This is a multi-hex land feature that extends as far as the eye can see. While you are within the Great Quagmire, you will not roll for encounters, you may not forage, and you cannot rest. For each day that passes in the Quagmire, you'll make a single foraging difficulty check of 8, adding +1 for each dwarf and rogue in your party. You'll also make a poison save versus difficulty of 8 for each character in your party. Failure to succeed in the poison save will of course result in the contracting of a poison. In this case, it's actually a plague. It's the Dark Plague, as outlined in Four Against the Abyss. The Dark Plague can be cured while in the Netherworld if you're willing to consume the pure soul of an innocent from a location called the Guff. Doing so will incur an immediate 1 point of madness to the character consuming the innocent soul. If the foraging roll was successful, then the party finds 3d6 worth of rubies and gold pieces. You may also stumble across demonic shrines. There are also small Netherworld dungeons ran by Netherworld bosses, dubbed as the Blasphemous Ones. The last common location that you may run into are strongholds, and strongholds are the equivalent to small cities. As mentioned earlier, you will have to pay to enter or face the consequences. This will be in the form of a group of enforcer minions that will attack upon refusal to pay the entry or the daily fee. In addition to the daily fee, you'll have to take a rest and seek shelter action every day. You'll be responsible for feeding any slaves you may happen to have, in addition to your characters. This is on top of the fee that the denizens of the stronghold already require. You will also have to make a d6 roll during this phase. If you happen to roll a 1, then you must roll for a hostile encounter on the Netherworld's minions table. Life is definitely not easy on the mean streets of the Netherworld. You can also shop the local markets for the day to see who is selling for that day and what goods or services they offer. You may hire retainers and professionals as well, using necros instead of the normal fee. These are, however, demonic retainers, and they have a chance to attack should certain circumstances arise in combat. Scattered throughout the stronghold, you'll find slave pens containing d6 times 100 slaves which are held captive. You can attempt to free them and escape, keeping in mind that all these slaves you just freed, well, again, you're going to have to feed them, and we won't go over the options for this, and I'm sure that you can let your mind wander on how you might feed some, if not all, of these multi-hundred number of captives. The book does a good job of describing what that might look like in detail. Do remember that you do get rewards for each captive or slave that you bring back to the comfort of your home dimension. You may also burn captives in the soul furnace to make soul cubes. We also talked about this a little bit earlier as well. You can decide to attack the Lord of the Stronghold directly. You will of course have to deal with all of his defending entourage. The last available action within a stronghold is the search for information action. You'll have a chance to roll on a table to see what kind of info that you find. This can be clues or other very valuable information that would be difficult to come by any other way. But then again, you're in a stronghold. So at this point, you've probably already chosen the difficult path to get that gossip anyway. The last type of feature on the Netherworld map come in the form of numbered hexes. These are very special locations that are unique to all others. We will cover these with a little more brevity. there are a total of 7 unique locations. 4 of these unique locations are large cities. We've already covered what you can do in these cities, as they will for the most part be much like their smaller stronghold counterparts, but they would not need to be a number if they did not have something unique or different about them. They will have higher prices at the markets, they will have double the number of captives and guards, their militia is 3 times the size of a stronghold, and the monster levels are increased by +1. So if you thought strongholds were unfriendly, then you certainly have stepped into the den now. Each city will have its own special unique characteristics as well. The other 3 unique number locations are quite a bit different, so I will read from the description of each to get your mind wandering on these, because they sound absolutely inviting. Of the last 3, we have Trenches of Harrowing. Millions of screaming souls, consumed by white flame, grasp at anyone coming into the gaping abyss in which they suffer an eternity of torment. Or there is a lost Salamandran haven. Once the pinnacle metropolis of the celestial host, the sculpted mountain of dark glass has fallen to the great ancient ones and their abominable spawn. And then last, and maybe not least, is the Guff. Beneath a tree husk large as a city rises a deep gorge where once lay the Guff, the legendary treasury of souls, where Lele, the angel of conception, once watched the embryos of the unborn before they were hatched into the world. Now the Guff lay mostly empty of souls, as no new ones were ever made since the great ancient ones have conquered the netherworld and drained it to fuel their abominable furnaces. So with that, we have covered the world that is the netherworld. And that leaves us with the new classes and tables that are offered with the Four Against the Netherworld supplement. So let's take a moment to talk about the new classes. And there are a total of 3 new classes and 2 new types of cleric as well. All of the classes we will cover here have their own unique expert level skills, and as we cover each class, I'll show those on the screen in addition to their basic class info that all Four Against Darkness characters share. Four Against the Netherworld adds one of the most unique classes I'd seen when it released, and honestly I still think it really stands out and gives one some pause for thought here. Demonologists have the ability to temporarily gain control of weird monster or boss hellspawn. This can be done only if the Demonologist lands a killing blow to the monster in combat. He must also succeed in a possession check with a difficulty rating equal to the monster he is trying to possess. Once the Demonologist has possession of the monster, he can use one of his abilities in combat, one of the monster's abilities. The Demonologist will maintain possession until he fails a possession roll, which he must make at the end of every combat, or if he releases the possessed from his bond. If he fails the possession check, once the Demonologist has possessed the monster, it will result in the monster releasing itself from possession. It will then return to full health and attack the Demonologist directly one-on-one. If the Demonologist chooses to release the monster, then they will leave without attacking them and the party can continue on as normal. In addition to possession, the Demonologist gets 2 free demonic traits from special tables with some restrictions, and this is a random roll for the traits, but some of them are very, very powerful additions for the class if you happen to get lucky on your rolls. Though the Demonologist is classified as a wizard subclass, they cannot cast spells unless they've acquired the Nether Sorcerer expert level skill through the leveling process. Another strong trait of the Demonologist is their immunity to madness. In fact, they aren't just immune to madness, they actually get to heal 1 health point at any time that they would normally receive a point of madness. On the downside, they cannot be resurrected, as their souls have been considered forsaken. So death is a rather permanent here. So with high reward in this class's strength comes some equally high risk. Another downside is that elves and paladins will not share a party with a Demonologist. So if you already have one of these classes, they might need to purchase some land or rent a room while the Demonologist stays in your party, only to return once the foul sorcerer has left or perished. The Demonologist also adds his full level when attacking enemies with the demon or aberration or chaos keywords. They also receive 1/2 their level when defending against these same enemies. For all other enemies, they only get 1/2 their level to add to their attack rolls. They also get to subtract 1/2 of their level for reaction rolls before combat when engaging Hellspawn. So, like a lot of the more unique Four Against Darkness characters, this one is definitely thematic. There are a decent amount of push or luck mechanics built into the class that make up for some of the more reasonably powerful abilities that they can use. Cambions, also called half-beings, are the next class introduced in Four Against the Netherworld. They're typically half human, half hellspawn. Cambions have a tendency to have multiple odd mutations. Think everything from demonic horns or spines to those of a more Lovecraftian nature. Cambions add half their level to their attacks, and their saves work as if they were counted as a warrior. They'll add their full level when casting spells directly or from scrolls. They can only cast Netherworld spells, and even then, only once per adventure. They may not cast spells that did not originate from the Netherworld. So if you have a Cambion in your party while roaming the Netherworld, it might be wise to do your best to find and stock up on Netherworld spells before leaving. You will likely not want to venture back after you leave, given the Netherworld's inhospitable and vile nature. Cambions receive their full level when saving against madness, and they can re-roll their first failed roll on a madness save. They do not require food in the Netherworld. Like the Demonologist, they subtract half their level when fighting Hellspawn. Also, like the Demonologist, they can receive a random ability from the same special tables. And this acts as their mutations that we mentioned here. The difference for the Cambions for the mutations, unlike the Demonologist, who gets theirs once they're first created, is that the Cambion can spend 2 XP rolls for random mutation instead of getting an expert level skill or level. There are, as expected, a few drawbacks as well. The more powerful the Cambion becomes, the more grotesque they'll look. So they'll have to subtract points equal to their current level from their social saves, persuasion rolls, or any challenges social in nature. They cannot use holy water, and once they receive their third madness point, they cannot be resurrected or blessed. So they're not quite as risky as the Demonologist here. I think the Cambion is my favorite out of the 3 main offerings for the classes here for the book. The idea of a randomly mutating party member is a pretty cool idea. It reminded me of the mutations I could get from my characters in the Shadows of Brimstone board game. But this was a much more accelerated version of that. The last full-fledged class in the book is the Paladin. I know I had been looking for this for some time, and it finally came in Four Against the Netherworld for me. We of course know what Paladins are, so I'll skip how Four Against the Netherworld handles them in the Four Against Darkness universe, or at least how it describes them. Paladins add their full level to their attack rolls. They can use prayers a number of times equal to their current level plus 1. Paladins cannot retreat even if the party does. They have a holy mission and it will be done. This holy fervor also extends to the current dungeon. They will only leave the dungeon if all healing potions have been used and that the whole party has less than half of their health points left. Speaking of their commitment to ridding the world of wrong and evil, Paladins also hold their commitment to supporting their order more directly in the form of donations or tithes to their order. Once they complete an adventure, they must, if they can, spend 10 gold times their level that goes towards their order. If they cannot pay this amount, they must hand over in tithes to their order all gems and gold found in that adventure. The remaining classes are 2 variations of faith that alter the base cleric class. The first of these is the Cleric of Zur. These clerics worship Zur, which is a demonic god that rules the Netherworld. They can spend a blessing use to instead turn an undead encounter into a peaceful reaction. This is an automatic success versus vermin and minions. Weird monsters and bosses can also be targeted with this ability, but it will require a save versus that monster's level. This cannot be used against the final boss, and as a cost to spending the blessing, regardless of the encounter type, the cleric will spend 1 HP in blood as an offering to Zur. Clerics of Zur do not need to eat while in the Netherworld, and will instead get sustenance from bone dust that you do not have to forage for. It must be assumed that the Netherworld is so hostile that the bones can be found more frequently than fruit on bushes and trees. They can take the lesser necromancy skill when using their XP for expert skills, but they cannot take create holy water or scroll maker. They also cannot at any time use soul cubes or procreate. Failure to follow these 2 rules will result in the forfeiture of their abilities until they take and complete a random quest in Atonement. The last faith variation for the cleric class are the Clerics of Phorios. Phorios is a direct enemy to Zur and is seen as a war god by its followers. Clerics of Phorios can spend a blessing point to gain their full level instead of their normal half level when in combat with a monster with the keyword demon. This will last the entire encounter. So we have covered quite a bit here, from basic overview of the Netherworld to an in-depth look at how it looks and feels to survive on this world ruled by demons and trade of the flesh and souls of mortals. We talked about the Hexcrawl system and its rules along with the new classes and cleric base. So for the last topic, I would like to talk about the tables that are included. Four Against the Netherworld includes, with the exception of those that we've already covered earlier in the review, the Netherworld objective table, which you can use to generate your first quest, as mentioned before, a table for special events that you will come across as you roam the Netherworld. There are new monster tables, such as the Undead Minions table, the Humanoid Minions table, the Demonic Minions table, the Netherworld Vermins table, the Netherworld Weird Monster table, and of course, the Netherworld Boss table. As the Netherworld contains new spells, you will find the new spells in the Netherworld's spell table. Along with the Netherworld treasure table, you'll also find the Netherworld magic items table. The book also comes with a blank printable or photocopiable for the physical version Netherworld map that you can use should you find yourself brave enough to venture into the unknown. Or perhaps maybe your party was dumped into an unknown area of the Netherworld to roam until they can find a gate, because the one they came in on is closed. There certainly is the potential for plenty of thoughts regarding triggers for new adventure or horrors here. So with that, I think it's time to talk about my final thoughts. I had to stretch my memory quite a bit to remember when this first came out, as it's been available for quite some time now. I seem to remember this being the first real major expansion that let you roam around. Looking on BoardGameGeek to check dates, I was able to confirm those memories. Four Against the Netherworld is my Four Against Darkness supplement, nemesis of sorts. It offers so much content and is so thick with theme. There are some Four Against Darkness supplements that I felt have much less theme than others, or that the theme was a mixed theme and was more about providing general content. Four Against the Netherworld was, and still is, one of the most thematic supplements in the Four Against Darkness universe. It is also a theme I could wrap my head around so well that it actually got to me more than I would have expected. I did not know too much about the theme other than it was going to be dark. I love dark fantasy, but there are levels or degrees of dark, as there are with many things. This was a level of dark that I was not used to visiting, and it was surprisingly hard for me to jump into as I saw the future of killing innocents and eating their flesh, or trading innocents for some form of survival-oriented gains. Who would then, be killed for the same cause. So really trading them was just as harsh. Either I got very lucky, or I was able to use the system to work my way through the Netherworld without resorting to most of my fears. My party did end up, either directly or indirectly, committing deeds they never would have done without direct pressure. And the Netherworld certainly has plenty of that. The entire dimension is set for these kinds of foul deeds. There are options presented in the new classes that will allow you to have more chances of avoiding those acts that you would normally have to take or succumb to death. You could, for example, hire a party of 4 classes that do not need to eat while in the underworld and send them in on a mission, maybe at some cost, to do the deed and get out. There are many ways you could find to include or use a side group like this. You might even find yourself becoming attached to one or more of your new characters. Do understand that this is my mind and perspective that has pigeonholed me into a restrictive mindset here. I know that there will be others that will thrive with this system. If you're looking for something that is dark, and there are also types of dark in addition to levels, then it is incredibly thematic and you can feel it. Even with my hesitant adventures into the Netherworld, I still felt that. I would have to, or I wouldn't have had that hesitation. I am sure that there are some that will simply see this as nothing more than a game and see this angle as a bit of unneeded insight or maybe dramatics. I too see it as just a game. I see both points as valid in their own right. But I did actually appreciate the experience, thoughts, dilemmas, and hesitations that I struggled with. I realized as I went through this dark world, and after, that I was asking questions, personal and otherwise, that I rarely feel whilst playing a game. I think this directly speaks to Eric's work with Four Against the Netherworld, As far as I'm concerned, this setting was pretty well nailed and it made an impact. Finally, having a Hexcrawl system for the World of Four Against Darkness universe was fun and, given the setting, challenging. It would be a while before another Hexcrawl came out. I enjoyed that particular supplement as well, but this would be it. I remember trying to find ways to incorporate the map generation using alternative Earth-based terrain so I could play through using my characters before the Hexcrawl systems came out. Though if I remember correctly, there have been a few fan-made options for this outside of the Netherworld supplement. Although I have already talked about the theme, as you travel through the pre-drawn map of the Netherworld, I really did get the feeling of traveling to unique locations and remembering wanting to avoid certain areas. Everywhere I went, dungeons included, just further reminded me of exactly where I was. As I played, I found myself getting a bit of a hard skin and found that things that were once feared became more of a norm or something that could be expected. I, for a split second, asked, what did I become? There is nowhere really to go in this world where this theme is not ever present. There are books in the Four Against Darkness series that have a lot of content that you can take with you to other supplements. I'm specifically thinking of one of the most integral to the system, the Four Against the Abyss supplement. Four Against the Netherworld does offer a lot of content, but it is content built around the world you'll be in. That is not to say that the classes or even some of the tables cannot be taken and used elsewhere. It is rather to say this focus on the content for the world is what helped to make this theme as thick as it is. Although I miss the ability to take the content in this book to other supplements and adventures, I do highly value the thoughts, feelings, and overall experience that it has given me as a player. I really felt like this expansion set the tone for what was to come, and I think, being that it was the first outside of Four Against the Abyss, it had no choice but to set the benchmark for what would come after it. I still think it holds its weight against other content that has or had come long after it. If you like this particular style or theme of dark settings, and certainly if you're already a fan of Four Against Darkness, I think it will go a long way to giving you an experience you'll remember for some time to come. So, with that said, as always, whether you have watched all the way through or not, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.